A suspect has been arrested in the JonBenet Ramsey murder case. Thank God. Maybe after a decade of questions and wondering, we will finally find out what happened to that poor, innocent little girl. We have to reflect at this time on how we treat children globally around the world, and unfortunately, we have to say humanity is doing a pretty deplorable job. There's the sexual exploitation of children. There's an international sex trade in children for pedophiles, which is horrible and deplorable. And this suspect in the JonBenet Ramsey case was arrested in just such circumstances. But there's also the literal enslavement of children around the world. They're bought and sold in slavery. And then there's still the virtual slavery of child labor, where children are pressed into doing 50, 60 hours of work a week. Terrible abuse, terrible exploitation of children. Then there's the exploitation of children by warlords who use children either as shields or actual fighters. In Rwanda, there were horrific scenes of Hutu children killing Tutsis. Terrible. Human beings have to cry out to God and say, forgive us for what we have done to our offspring. But we have to look in a particular way in the United States. The worst crimes are not sexual abuse of children, but the actual murder of children. Almost 600 children are murdered every year. I'm talking about children under the age of 5. Under the age of 5, almost 600 children murdered a year in our country. JonBenet Ramsey was 6, that poor little girl. And maybe by reflecting on her murder, we could reflect on the slaying of all the other children that has taken place in our nation and continues to take place, and ask ourselves what we could do about it. Now, some of you may be saying, well, Father Mickler, you are a Catholic priest, and we know the scandal that has rocked your church. How can you talk to us about this important subject? And I say, how can I not talk about it? Every day of my life, I pray for the mercy of God to come down upon those children and their families who have been sexually exploited by priests. I'm enraged that 4% of priests over a 50-year period seem to have had that perversion. And if you'd like to learn more about that, you could find out all the statistics from the John Jay Criminal College report on sexual abuse by clergy at www.nccbuscc.org/NRB. I'll be talking on that subject extensively in the future, as I have to various groups in the past. But today I want to focus on that more general question of violence against children in our society that was so exemplified in the JonBenet Ramsey case. It happens all too often. No economic group or race or ethnic or religious group is exempt from this. And many families have this as one of their greatest fears. The Mayo Clinic did a survey and found that 3/4 of parents fear that their children might be abducted. And 1/3 of parents worry about that more than they do about the use of alcohol or drugs or automobile accidents, which are also great threats for children. That's how deeply the fear grips our parents and our families. There is some hope. All violent crime seems to be on the decline in the United States, with the exception of murder. It's sort of holding steady. And I keep having that one statistic rattling around in my head of the children that are murdered and slain. Unfortunately, many times by their own parents, but frequently by strangers. And of all the scenarios of a child being murdered, the thought of being murdered in his or her own home, where he or she should be perfectly safe, is by far the most heinous. Now there'll be pundits giving political, legal solutions, sociological solutions to this problem. I would just like to offer my ideas on a spiritual approach to the problem. And spiritually, whatever religious tradition a person's from, we have to see how unique human beings are and how important we are in the plan of God. How every one of us are creatures that deserve respect and should show respect to others. On an ever deeper level, we have to reverence ourselves and reverence others, see ourselves as something special. There seems to be a great anti-human movement in the world, even in the academic circles. The world is overpopulated, there's too many of us, we'd be better off with 1 billion or 2 fewer human beings. At the Cairo conference in 1994, one of the representatives said, "In my country, if a cow was born, it's seen as development. And if a baby's born, it's seen as an ecological disaster." Where have we gone wrong where we fear one another and we fear having children, nurturing children, and loving children? It's a spiritual question that all of us have to answer. Throughout history, children have been seen as a blessing. Now, too often, they're seen as a curse and a burden. May the Creator have mercy on us. The good news is that that mercy is there for the asking. Now, in forming a more humane society, we do need laws to protect the most defenseless in our midst, the children. Unfortunately, we can't even decide what a child is, as we see the age of consent laws vary from state to state. And our neighbors to the north in Canada have the incredibly low age of consent law at 14. So the predators could exploit 14 and 15-year-old girls and boys legally. How do we protect those in our midst? Well, the truth is we can't have a policeman in every home. But we can have homes that are formed wisely and well, and informed by the power of God, whatever religious tradition the person is from. And for those homes that don't have a religious tradition, why not start a new humanism where human beings are respected and honored, and children are seen as precious? Now, with this view comes an understanding that every child is a part of our family. There's always been this controversy about it takes a whole village to raise a child. No, it takes a whole family to raise a child. Well, it's a little bit of both. We can't allow any child in our community or in our country to be neglected, exploited, and abused, and ultimately murdered without it affecting all of us. I'm not smart enough to come up with any social plans, but I am wise enough to know that we can't do it on our own. We're going to need the help of the God who loves us. My prayer for JonBenet and her family is that she'll rest in peace and they will know the mercy of God.